The movie starts off with a heartbroken boy named Gray, telling his crush that he's hurt and feels betrayed. Struggling to hold back tears, he admits that he has finally come to terms with the fact that his feelings will never be reciprocated. He understands now that he'll never be enough, and there's nothing more he can do. Sniffling, he talks about how he tried to make himself more attractive and put in so much effort to win over his crush, only to end up making a fool of himself. At this point, Gray's crush, Jonas, nods quietly and then bursts into laughter. It turns out that the two are actually acting for a play and are not in a real-life situation. In reality, they are best friends auditioning for the school drama. Moving forward, Gray gets incredibly annoyed by Jonas's behavior and berates him for ruining the scene. They walk off the stage for a break, during which Jonas teases Gray for being so emotional over a simple scene. Gray shrugs, explaining that he wants to give his all for the role. He then taunts Jonas by saying that he's probably never fallen in love with someone who hadn't loved him back. Because of this, he couldn't understand Gray's hurt and yearning during the act. This eventually leads to a small argument, with Gray accusing Jonas of always wanting to be the center of attention. That's when Jonas scoffs and retorts that the only reason he's even in the play is because Gray forced him to. At that moment, their mutual friend Nicole runs toward them, profusely apologizing for being so late. Since she's also part of the play, she immediately asks if the director is upset with her for not being punctual. Gray reassures her that everything is fine, then asks her to take his side in his argument with Jonas. Nicole readily agrees, and the two begin mocking Jonas for his behavior. At one point, Nicole even teases Gray and Jonas about how close they are, joking that they'd make the ultimate couple. Jonas immediately denies this, while Gray just blushes and tries to change the subject. Shortly after, Jonas announces that he has a date. Gray gasped, surprised, since Jonas had broken up with his boyfriend just a week ago. He urges Jonas to take things slow, but Jonas simply brushes him off and proceeds to walk away. Now alone, Gray groans in boredom and asks Nicole if he can hang out with her. But that's when Nicole reveals she actually has a study date with her boyfriend. Seeing that he has no one to hang out with anymore, Gray tells Jonas and Nicole that he'll just go on a date. Hearing this, Jonas becomes curious and tries to ask Gray more about it. But just as Gray is about to elaborate, the director walks over and asks them to get ready for the next scene. As a result, all three of them hurry backstage to prepare their lines. After a while of practicing, Jonas hastily grabs his stuff and bids Gray goodbye. He then instantly runs out, leaving Gray alone in the auditorium. This doesn't bother Gray, so he keeps scrolling through his phone. At one point, a really handsome guy walks in and observes Gray for a while, watching as he dances around and takes selfies. However, when Gray notices him and tries to start a conversation, the guy quickly runs out. Realizing that the guy might be his date, Gray texts him to confirm if it is really him in the auditorium. The guy replies that it was, but says he doesn't want to go on the date anymore. He explains that he's not into feminine boys and feels like they aren't a good match. As expected, Gray is deeply hurt by this and is on the verge of tears. However, that's when Jonas suddenly appears beside him, urging him to come home. It's clear that Jonas understands what just happened, so he does his best to cheer Gray up. Shortly after, Gray composes himself and walks out of the auditorium with Jonas. The two joke around to lighten the mood as they head towards Gray's house. Once there, Gray grimaces and talks about how no one seems to want him anymore. He wonders aloud if it's because he's unattractive or just too much for people to handle. Jonas quickly reassures him, saying he should wait for the right person who will treat him with kindness and respect. Gray nods but admits that it still hurts when no guy ever wants to go on a date with him. Jonas responds by telling him that the guys just can't see his beauty, and if they don't want him, it's their loss. Eventually, Jonas urges Gray to have a little faith and to believe in himself. Gray thanks him for the support and expresses how lucky he feels to have a best friend like Jonas. Jonas smiles and changes the subject. A little later, Jonas takes a quick shower and prepares for bed. Before turning in, he asks Gray for a massage. Gray reluctantly agrees, climbs onto Jonas's back, and starts the massage. As he works, he chastises Jonas for using his name during every breakup, explaining that all of his exes think Jonas is cheating on them with him. Jonas laughs, explaining that he always makes it clear on the first date that he isn't looking for anything serious. Scoffing, he adds that it's not his fault everyone falls for him. At that moment, Gray lays down beside him and laments about how he wants a serious relationship, but can't ever seem to get into one. After a brief conversation, Gray offers to help Jonas find his one true love. Jonas, however, isn't pleased with the idea. He explains that true love is hard to find, and the people he dates are only interested in his popularity and looks. As he tries to say more, he realizes that Gray has already fallen asleep. With a deep sigh, Jonas turns towards Gray and gently caresses his face. It's clear that they both have feelings for each other. Eventually, they fall asleep in each other's arms. The next day, Gray goes to school and immediately runs up to Nicole. The two start talking about their day and joke around. Suddenly, Ricky, the director of the upcoming play, furiously approaches Gray and demands to know where Jonas is. Offended, Gray replies that he doesn't know, since he's not Jonas's secretary. He adds that he's just the stage manager and can't keep track of every actor's whereabouts. Hearing this, Ricky drags Nicole away, since she's the main lead, and starts searching for Jonas. Gray bids Nicole goodbye and turns to walk to class. Just then, a boy bumps into Gray, spilling his drink everywhere. Gray gasps in shock and looks up, only to find that the person who knocked over his drink is none other than Yates, his first love. Yates, feeling incredibly embarrassed for ruining Gray's outfit, profusely apologizes and even wipes the drink from Gray's lips. As expected, Gray blushes and squeals in excitement. He quickly forgives Yates, explaining that it was partly his fault too. However, Yates disagrees and insists on giving him his jacket to cover the stain on his shirt. Gray is flattered by all this and doesn't know how to respond. Eventually, he tries to change the topic by asking Yates what he's doing here, since he moved abroad years ago. Yates replies that he has finally moved back for good and is trying to learn Tagalog now. Gray nods in understanding and jokes around with him for quite a while. Gray eagerly agrees, and they head to the auditorium to find Jonas. Once there, Yates cheerfully greets Jonas and gives him a tight hug. Meanwhile, Gray blushes and continues to smell Yates's jacket. Nicole approaches and asks him what's going on. Gray explains that Yates is their childhood friend and is originally from the US. After a brief chat, all four of them decide to go grab some drinks together. In the cafeteria, Gray, Jonas, and Yates sit together to catch up on lost time. During their conversation, Yates reveals that Jonas already knew about his arrival. When Gray questions why he wasn't informed, Jonas simply shrugs, claiming it was meant to be a surprise. Furthermore, Yates asserts that he and Jonas have been texting each other for quite some time, which is how Yates is already up to date on all the documents and schoolwork. Upon hearing this, Gray feels isolated since the three of them were once best friends. However, he maintains his composure and continues to flirt with Yates. Later that day, while Gray and Nicole are looking at costumes for the play, Nicole jokingly teases Gray about how he longs for Yates. She exclaims that he blushes profusely and becomes a different person around him. Gray giggles and then confesses that Yates was his first love, and sadly, he still hasn't been able to move on. Gray adds that Yates never knew about his feelings, so they never got together. Nicole gasps in surprise and urges Gray to confess his feelings. Gray refuses, not wanting to ruin their friendship, but after much insistence from Nicole, he decides to give it a shot. Later, Nicole and Gray decorate the school premises to make the atmosphere more romantic. Gray begins practicing lines for his confession to Yates. When Jonas sees this, he asks what's going on, but Gray quickly changes the subject. He suggests Jonas go home since school is over. Jonas asks Gray to come with him, but Nicole swiftly drags him away. As they leave, Yates casually walks over to Gray and asks what the decorations are for. Gray giggles nervously and tries to share his true feelings, but before he can, Yates interrupts and says he has something important to tell him. Yates reveals that he has a massive crush on Jonas and wants to ask him out. As expected, Gray is devastated by the news and struggles to hide his feelings. He tries to stay calm and asks Yates to elaborate. Yates exclaims that he wants Jonas to be his boyfriend, but doesn't really know how to make the proposal. Throughout the conversation, Gray takes deep breaths, trying his best not to cry. He feels angry at the fact that everyone falls in love with Jonas since he's more attractive and masculine. But mostly, he feels betrayed, knowing his two best friends might soon start dating each other. Despite his feelings, Gray agrees to help Yates woo Jonas and tries to come up with proposal ideas. He also asks Yates if he's sure about Jonas, since Jonas isn't the relationship type. Yates insists he is, and then shares that Jonas helped him heal when his father passed away from cancer a year ago. Gray understands this, and eventually, promises to help Yates. The next day, Yates joins the theater club to get closer to Jonas. He and Gray sit together to discuss Jonas's likes and dislikes. However, when Jonas sees them chatting happily, he feels as though they like each other. He tries to get Gray alone, but Gray doesn't catch on, and instead keeps pushing Yates towards him. At one point, Gray even asks Yates to act opposite Jonas in the play since Nicole was absent that day. Yates readily agrees, and they begin rehearsing their lines. Suddenly, Jonas feels uncomfortable and rushes out. Gray tries to follow him, but Jonas stops him, asking him to act in his place instead. Feeling giddy inside, Gray acts as Jonas's stand-in for the rehearsal. Throughout it all, he can't stop thinking about what's bothering Jonas. Shortly after practice, Nicole rushes toward the auditorium, apologizes for her absence, and even offers to help Gray and Yates put the props back in the costume room. Gray readily obliges, but much to his dismay, Nicole ends up locking him and Yates inside the room. Gray immediately panics and bangs loudly on the door, but his voice falls on deaf ears. Not wanting the atmosphere to become awkward, Gray asks Yates to talk about himself and his experience in the US. Yates doesn't say much, and instead, laments about how Jonas doesn't like him back. That's when Gray suggests playing hard to get with Jonas, since he likes a little chase. Yates stops him right there, and says they're probably better off as friends. Gray simply nods at that and doesn't reply. At that moment, Yates realizes how close he's gotten to Gray over the past few days. Feeling excited, he tells Gray he's really interested in learning more about him. Gray, blushing now, exclaims that he wants to get to know Yates better too. The two start chatting about their hobbies and lives while waiting for Nicole to come and let them out. Hours pass, and Nicole doesn't return. Now frustrated, Gray bangs on the door harder, but to no avail. The heat in the room causes both of them to sweat profusely, so they decide to take their shirts off. When Yates sees Gray standing in front of him in nothing but a wife-beater, he realizes just how attractive Gray is. Somewhere deep inside, Yates starts to recognize that he might have feelings for Gray too. Without thinking much, he approaches Gray and pulls him into a passionate kiss. The two make out for quite some time, and things soon get really heated. As a result, they end up making love and spending the night together. The next morning, Jonas walks around the entire school premises, but can't seem to find Gray. He gets really agitated by this, and ends up quitting the play out of sheer anger. As expected, Ricky insults him harshly. When Nicole learns about this, she rushes to Jonas and begs him not to quit. She offers to help him with his schoolwork and studies, but despite her efforts, Jonas remains firm in his decision. Noticing his uneasiness, Nicole asks if something else is bothering him. She even asks him if he's fallen for someone. Jonas doesn't answer, and just runs away. Concerned, Nicole calls Gray and asks for help. Moments later, Gray angrily approaches Jonas and demands to know why he quit the play. He accuses Jonas of wasting their efforts and begs him to join the play again. Jonas instantly refuses and tries to walk away, but Gray stops him, asking if something is bothering him. After a long silence, Jonas admits that Gray's closeness to Yates is really bothering him. Now confused, Gray urges Jonas to tell him the truth. With no other choice, Jonas finally reveals that he hates how Gray keeps pushing him toward Yates. He explains that it's clear Gray has feelings for Yates, and it's obvious that he's sidelining himself to help Yates. Hearing this, Gray sighs deeply, explaining that he's only helping Yates because he thought he and Yates would never be together. Eventually, Jonas offers to give Gray the space he needs to pursue Yates, but instead of agreeing, Gray reveals that Yates might have feelings for him too. Suddenly, Jonas's face falls, and he looks heartbroken. Gray is really confused by this as he thought getting Yates off of Jonas's back would make him happy. Now annoyed, Gray asks Jonas to come clean, and that's when Jonas, hesitantly, reveals that he's tired of just being best friends. Shaking, he confesses that he's in love with Gray and can't stand seeing him with anyone else. With a solemn face, Jonas admits that he should have expressed his feelings sooner, but was always too scared. Hearing this, Gray is at a complete loss for words. Before he can gather his thoughts, Jonas steps closer and asks if Gray feels the same way. He asks why they can't be the ones in a happy relationship. Gray tries to respond, but Jonas suddenly interrupts by kissing him passionately. As they kiss, Gray remembers all the moments Jonas cared for him and caressed him. But in the present, he pulls away and runs off, unsure of what will happen next. Jonas watches him leave, distressed, but silent. Gray runs towards the auditorium and watches the rehearsal play. As he's observing Nicole deliver her lines, Jonas barges into the room and climbs onto the stage. Without thinking, he looks straight at Gray and begins confessing his feelings. He then declares that he's rejoining the play. Yates, who had taken Jonas's place, is furious and argues that Jonas can't just change his mind whenever he pleases. In response, Jonas scoffs and retorts that Yates isn't a good actor anyway. Gray immediately rushes onto the stage to pull them apart, but fails miserably. The argument quickly escalates, and Jonas reveals that Yates has already confessed his feelings to him, but Jonas rejects him, saying he is in love with Gray. Despite knowing this, Yates flirts with Gray, not because he likes him, but to get back at Jonas. Gray is taken aback by this and doesn't know how to respond. Meanwhile, Jonas and Yates continue to exchange insults in front of the entire audience. Soon enough, they start throwing punches, causing a huge commotion. Gray instinctively tries to help Yates, further hurting Jonas. Ricky, who only cares about the play, orders Gray to fix the situation as soon as possible and storms out of the auditorium. A few moments later, Gray attempts to leave as well, but Jonas stops him and asks if he's choosing Yates. Overwhelmed, Gray begs Jonas for more time and runs off. He rushes to Yates and tends to his injuries, as he was hurt badly. While Gray cares for him, Yates asks if Gray has made his choice. Stressed, Gray sighs and says that he doesn't want to choose between his two best friends. He even goes on to admit that he's unsure if Yates truly likes him or is just physically attracted to him. At that moment, Yates gently grabs Gray's hand and assures him that he really does like him. He then asks Gray if he feels the same. Gray takes a deep breath and tells Yates that he is actually his first crush. Not only that, he is now Gray's first kiss too. Yates smiles, hoping their relationship will blossom into something more beautiful. Moving forward, Gray asks Yates to forgive Jonas, explaining that Jonas was just too frustrated. Yates agrees without hesitation and assures Gray that if he ever chooses Jonas over him, he'll understand and remain friends with both of them. Relieved, Gray smiles and begins joking to lighten the mood. Finally, Gray confesses that he can't make a decision just yet, but he will soon. He bids Yates goodbye with a tight hug. Jonas, watching from afar, assumes Gray has chosen Yates. Heartbroken, he throws away the gift he had prepared for Gray and walks away. On his way home, he regrets not confessing his feelings sooner. Jonas also realizes that the reason he never entered a serious long-term relationship is that he had been longing for Gray all along. His dates were merely distractions and nothing more. The next day, Jonas and Nicole prepare for their drama performance, which plays out smoothly. Their act is applauded and praised by the entire audience. As a result, all the participants and organizers cheer excitedly and congratulate each other. As stage manager, Gray hugs Nicole tightly, complimenting her on her amazing performance. He then asks about Jonas's whereabouts and looks around to find him, hoping to clear the air between them. At that moment, the school janitor approaches Gray and hands him a diary, asking if it belongs to him. Curious, Gray says it is, and takes the diary. He and Nicole open it to find multiple pictures of him and Jonas. Gray quickly realizes that it's actually a journal capturing all of their special moments together. Both Gray and Nicole are shocked. Gray becomes emotional when he sees pictures from their childhood, along with a CD player that reminds Jonas of him. Just as Gray finishes looking through the journal, a timid Yates quietly approaches him. Sensing the atmosphere, Nicole makes up an excuse and leaves. Moments later, Yates hands Gray a beautiful bouquet, praising him for his efforts in the play. He then asks Gray to join him for dinner. However, Gray declines, explaining that he has to stay back for something important. Yates understands and bids him goodbye. As soon as Yates leaves, Gray runs to the auditorium to find Jonas. There, he sees Jonas walking away. Gray immediately stops him and shows him the journal. Seeing it, Jonas walks over and confesses that he has always been in love with Gray. He goes on to add that he'll just suppress his feelings since Gray has already chosen Yates. Amused, Gray clarifies that he hasn't made a decision yet. He then says that he doesn't understand what Jonas sees in him, which is why he can't comprehend everything that has happened. Jonas replies that he's in love with each and everything about Gray. With tears streaming down his face, he exclaims that he wants to take care of Gray for as long as he can. Needless to say, Gray is touched by this. He finally comes to terms with the fact that he's also madly in love with Jonas. Wiping away his tears, Gray tells Jonas that he can now be with someone who truly accepts him for who he is. Then, he moves closer to Jonas and kisses him passionately. The movie finally ends with Jonas and Gray embracing each other and starting a new chapter of their lives together.